Hello and welcome back to Matt's Mission Marine, your home for my take on boats, waterways, and conversations along the way. I want to say thank you to those of you that have subscribed to the channel. We were able to go over a major milestone and get to over 1,000 views on the content that we've put out so far. Really excited about that. Awesome job. Today we're going to talk to Frank and Karen. They're a couple that sailed around the world, and they're going to share their experience with us and everything it took to get ready for that trip. So let's strap on those life vests and let's get started. Introduce yourselves. What's your name?
Frank Taylor.
Frank Taylor?
Karen Taylor.
Karen Taylor, okay. And you guys recently, or within the last 10 years, I guess, circumnavigated the Earth, right? The globe, right?
That's right.
Running around
All
the
the way.
world. What made you decide that you wanted to do that?
Well, I kind of had the dream from an early age of always wanting to go around the world. And I had also been very interested in sailing from an early age. So when we met later in life, Karen knew that I was interested in sailing, and I was a member of a sailing club in the Houston, Texas area. And so we started sailing early on in our relationship. And fortunately, she's very competent and able to sail quite well.
Oh, thank you.
And she loves it, like I do. So we're very compatible in that respect. So.
And I just want to let the viewers know that during this interview, we will be posting pictures from the trip, and we'll also post a link to y'all's website for the expedition. So if anybody wants to go out in there and read the complete story, they can, and they'll have access to that. So when you got ready to do this expedition, you guys call it, you had to pick a proper boat, correct?
Yes.
All right. So what did you pick and why?
Well, we picked a catamaran,
Mm-hmm.
and the reason is, although I sailed most of my life in monohulls, single-hull boats, when we were trying to decide what vessel to get when we did a trip with our children years before this bigger trip, I did a lot of reading and found out that catamarans are very stable platform and fast and roomy, and so we thought with kids and everything and going on an extended trip, a catamaran would be good. So we got one and we loved it. We thought it was fantastic for cruising, had great experiences.
So you guys tried the monohull, and then you tried a different trip, which is also on our channel for anybody that's interested. And we interviewed your kids and talked about that.
Mm-hmm.
So you tried both types, and you decided the catamaran maybe a little more stable, it had a lot of room, and so that's kind of ultimately why you went with the catamaran versus the monohull.
Right, and another big point is speed.
Okay.
You know, so your passages are shorter, and some of the passages are very long, and literally days shorter on a catamaran that can go faster speeds than on a monohull.
Monohull is limitation by the shape and the size of its hull.
Right.
It can only go so fast, no matter how much wind it has on a monohull. The catamaran, to kind of hydroplane at a certain point.
Mm-hmm.
Planing is what it's called.
Yeah.
So it can go faster.
Awesome.
Way faster.
So tell me about the layout of the catamaran.
Tahina is a 50-foot catamaran made in South Africa, and it has 4 different queen-size staterooms. One of the staterooms was pretty much dedicated for storage and mechanical equipment, tools and whatnot to keep the boat in shape. But the other 3 were available as staterooms for people. Even though the 2 of us lived on it most of the time, we would invite guests and friends and family to come and stay with us for parts of the trip. And so it was nice to have, because there were 2 hulls, our stateroom was on the side with the other stateroom I mentioned that was mechanical. So always the other guests were living on the other hull. So there was separation physically. There's a salon and navigation station and parts of the galley that are up in the middle part, and then the other 2 staterooms on the other side, and the galley is on the other side. So that kept separation and gave everyone privacy.
So you talked about the name of the boat. You mentioned it very briefly. Is you called it the Tahina. So when you bought the boat, was that the name?
No.
Okay.
But for all intents and purposes, since it was our boat, we're the ones that named it. When they manufactured the boat in South Africa, they had to come up with a name until they brought it to the United States to sell it. So that name is there's a superstition about boats about changing the name of a boat. You have to go through a ceremony. It's supposed to erase all evidence of any prior name. You obviously have to register the name and all that, but part of the ceremony is that you have to make a sacrifice to the sea, pour a drink overboard, and christen the new name of the boat like you would with a new boat.
Right.
Which it was to us. It was a new boat. So we did all of that. We christened the boat and tried to remove all evidence of all names all over the boat.
Let's start talking about planning for this trip. So you first said, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to do a circumnavigation. What was the first thing that you had to plan for, and how did the planning start?
Well, our decision to do the circumnavigation started all the way back when we took our kids out, 7 or 8 years before. Karen and I, at that point, we weren't sure how much we were going to like the life of cruising on a sailboat and spending years possibly on the boat. But when we went, we loved it. And so we made a decision back when our kids were with us that we would want to do that. So we told them, hey, when you guys go off to college, we'll buy a boat and sell our house, and you'll be on your own going to college, and we'll go sail around the world. So they were prepared for that over years, and but it helped us, start thinking at that stage years before that we were going to do this. When it came to making the actual decision to go, I'd say we got started, 2 or 3 years before we bought the boat. We started going to boat shows and looking at boats.
Okay.
And then we narrowed it down and got to 2008, early 2008, we went to the Miami Boat Show, and we said, okay, we identified that we wanted to go with the South African boat builder, St. Francis Marine, and they usually take about a year to build the boats. But we went to ask them, and they're like, we are on a 2-year backlog. We're not going to be able to build you one for 2 years. And we're like, that's going to be too late. So the boat that we saw at the boat show had not sold right away. They took it back to the Bahamas, where the guy who sells them keeps them. And so we went back to the Bahamas to check it out and decided, it actually has all the important features we want. And we bought it.
And it's available now.
It's available now. So we're like, okay. So we bought it in the summer of 2008. And that's when the major preparations for the trip began. First, to get the boat ready, start buying lots of equipment that the boat didn't come with that are important for circumnavigation, like adding satellite communication and long-range radio communication, and buying a dinghy, so we have our car for the boat, and things like that. And then we also simultaneously started preparing, we're going to have to sell the house, we need to get the house ready to be sold.
Divest a lot of things that we had. We had to sell a lot of things that we had, give away, put it in storage.
Yeah.
Because we were going from a 4,000 square foot house to, how big is that? 1,800 square foot
Right.
in the boat. So, yeah,
Right.
It was a big change.
Right, and we couldn't store everything, and it just didn't make sense to keep all of that stuff we didn't need for a larger house.
Well, we were going to be gone a long time.
Yeah.
So, all of that took a long time. I mean, year and a half almost from the time we bought the boat to when we actually departed.
Okay.
In the fall of 2009.
And then, you talked a little bit about prepping the boat and electronics you needed. Go a little bit deeper into that, because I'm just interested in that myself, like, what kind of navigation systems you went with, and communication systems. And
Right. Well, the boat built in South Africa, they build all their boats for blue water cruising, for going. I mean, they can't even deliver it until they sailed at 8,000 miles to go to the Miami Boat Show. So, you know, it was well proven and well used, you know, for a brand new boat. So it actually had, you know, a good charting navigation system. It had VHF radio. It had, you know, all the, you know, had a water maker. It had a generator. So, you know, all the things you need to go long range.
Except it didn't have a washer dryer yet.
Well, that's true.
We got one though.
Yeah. So there were things that we added to it, like the washer dryer, because we were going to be living on the boat continuously. So they don't necessarily prepare it for, you know, you're going to live here all the time. But like, you know, the water maker is an important choice to have, because you need water wherever you go around the world. You don't know what the quality of the water is going to be in a foreign country, so it's important to have your own source of water, which we're making from the sea.
Right.
But we did add a SSB radio, which is basically a ham radio for the sea, which enabled us to have conversations with other boats when we're on long passages, so that everyone could keep track of one another and know that everyone's doing well, and if they need help, they have someone to call who is relatively close.
So is that kind of like an extended VHF radio, or is it completely
No,
different?
it's like a ham radio. You can literally talk thousands of miles, people thousands of miles away.
Gotcha.
We also bought a satellite phone, so that we also had the ability to call anyone in the world from wherever we were. So that was important. And we had a satellite, another satellite phone system as well, that enabled us to have internet from wherever we were. At that time, Iridium and other systems weren't particularly good for internet access, and we, although we could get short-range radio communication for like Wi-Fi when we were in a port to get internet, cell phones weren't widely available yet when we started the trip in 2009.
And a lot of places didn't have good Wi-Fi. The undersea cables didn't necessarily run, and there weren't a lot of satellites worldwide to provide that. I mean, like in Tahiti at the time when we were there, it was very expensive to get the Wi-Fi, and the amount of Wi-Fi you get was limited because they didn't have the cables in yet.
Yeah.
Now they have the cables in. Everything is like
it's totally
here.
different.
Totally.
And of course, you know, cell phone technology proliferated very quickly from 2009 to by even 2011. It was pretty much universal. All the islands, unless they didn't have any kind of modern infrastructure, had cell phone service.
The place that really was the most remarkable in that aspect for me was Vanuatu. They had almost no electric service. In the villages, they didn't have anything, but every family had a cell phone. And so they're taking us on a tour, and they pick us up because the roads are very rugged. Actually, they want to take us up to the volcano, and they actually were driving on dry riverbed, so it's, you know, really kind of out back in this big pickup truck. And on the dashboard, he has all the cell phones charging while he's running
From
the engine.
people in their villages, because they all need cell phone to know where they're at, but they don't have a way to charge it because they have no electricity.
We
That's
even
fun.
had a couple of young men come out to our boat in a dugout canoe and ask if they could leave their phone there to charge.
Yeah, it's weird when you have somebody who has no electricity at their home and they visit you on their boat, and the thing they want is to use your electric power to charge their electronics. It's
So it's amazing. Cell phone access has really changed the world. It's made it smaller in a lot of ways.
But when we started, we didn't have that necessarily always available. So like I bought another thing we bought early on was a big antenna for picking up Wi-Fi from a long distance. So I could pick up Wi-Fi from like 2 miles away. So when we're at anchor in a port, we could try to tap into some Wi-Fi somewhere, like even a McDonald's Wi-Fi or something.
Right.
so that we could get internet.
Even better range if you take it and run it up the mast and
Right.
hang it in the air as high as you can get it.
Right.
So what about, getting kind of back to the equipment, what about weather? How did you track the weather? You have a satellite system for that, or radar, or?
Well, yeah, we used whatever sources were available. I always had to get some access to internet some way to get, while we're on passages, to get at least daily updates. Because otherwise, weather is finicky and changes, as anyone knows. When you get a weather forecast, it can change from 1 hour even to another. And when you're making a passage, you don't want to run into like an unexpected storm or a cyclone, or a hurricane or something. So it was vitally important to pick up weather.
All right, so you talked a little bit about blogging. What kind of partnerships did you have?
Yeah, so my idea was, first of all, I should just back up a little bit.
Okay.
First of all, I back in the early 2000s when Google came out with Google Earth, I was thinking about doing blogging as a way of exploring writing and making money.
Mm-hmm.
And I started blogging about Google Earth, and it turned out I had a knack for it, and it was Google Earth was an extremely popular application, and I became well known in the internet sphere for having this blog all about Google Earth. And it fit in a lot with my piloting and sailing, that Google Earth is very useful for researching places you want to go and sharing visualizations like your GPS tracks and where you were and where you took photos and so forth. And so I kind of leveraged that when I was thought about going on our sailing trip, and I developed a relationship with some of the key people at Google, I approached them with the idea of maybe they could help me bring technologies that I could use to share information in Google Earth with the people around the world as we traveled. And they liked that idea, so they actually helped finance some of the equipment that I purchased for sharing information with Google Earth. That was a key partnership. And once I announced that, of course, and with other things that I had done with the other blogging, I was able to identify a number of other key partners. For example, a company that made basically a drone for underwater use. It's like a little submarine that travels on its own, remotely controlled from the boat, and allowed us to take photos and videos under the sea. And I approached them with the idea, and they gave me a very special arrangement for using their submarine.
That's cool.
And I also formed partnerships with camera and photography companies who helped me take, like, for example, 360 panoramas that we took all over the world, and just a number of other marine-related companies that obviously would have an affinity if my site became really popular.
So you had the underwater camera, you had the availability to do 360 panoramics. What about drones? Were you able to do any aerial shots from a drone or anything like that?
Well, not exactly drones. At the time when I started this was before drones, although they existed, they weren't popular or inexpensive. And I had written about in my prior blog, the Google Earth blog, about people using kites, where they take a camera and attach it to the string of a larger sized kite than you would normally fly, and do photography just like with a drone, where you can aim the camera around and take different photos from different points of view. And since I wanted straight down photos for Google to put into Google Earth, I did that. I took a camera with kites and flew them over islands and took pictures of the sea and the islands, and then I was able, because of the relationship with Google, to submit that photography, and they scanned it and put it into Google Earth. And
That's awesome.
Instead of being from a satellite hundreds of miles above the land, these photos were taken from like 200 or 300 feet, so much higher resolution photos.
How many of your pictures that you took from things like that kite and the 360 panoramic actually made it to Google Earth? Do you know?
Well, there was about, I think it was about 160 photos, or 360 photos, that ended up in Google Earth. And then there was only about, let's say, 8 or 10 places that ended up in high resolution in Google Earth, and most of them are still there today.
So I'm going to kind of backtrack a little bit here. So when you get ready to go on this trip and you're packing for the trip, obviously you're going to pack as many provisions and things like that as you can, but how do you go about packing for a trip where you're going to be gone for multiple years?
Well, you kind of estimate how long you're going to be from port to port and try and decide what kind of things are available where you're going. And based on that, decide about how much extra food you want to take with you. A lot of it has to be long-term canned food.
Mm-hmm. Are you just talking about provisioning, or also about for the whole trip?
Like for the whole trip, like clothes and food and medical supplies?
Yeah. But it's interesting, even the areas where you don't think there's much available, like in the way out in nowhere land, it's surprising they're pretty well stocked, and I didn't expect to find things.
To finding provisions, but he's talking about like what clothes.
That includes clothing.
Okay.
That includes medical supplies.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of places we found, as far as medical supplies are concerned, are a lot less expensive than they are here, particularly medication. But yeah, you kind of estimate, and we had a lot of space under the floorboards of the boat to put provisions. Mm-hmm. So we did a lot of provisioning, can-wise, and dried foods. But expected not to find much out there, and it was all pretty well stocked. We got really concerned leaving
The Galapagos. Or not
from Panama,
From Panama,
making our way across the Pacific Ocean. So the four of us figured we would stock up really big in Panama City because all the boats go through there. There is an amazing amount of food that goes through there. They have all the boats going through and dropping supplies off the big cargo vessels, and they have visitors coming through and stocking up, so they have lots of supplies. So we filled up like 2 giant shopping carts with canned goods, and then we also went and got fresh goods and filled up the freezer. That freezer holds a lot of food. It's a big chest freezer. So some of those canned goods were still on the boat when we got back.
Yeah.
So we never went hungry. We never had a problem. We always had enough food because we did put more on the boat than we thought we would need, and then found out even though we thought we were going to need more food, that there was so much fresh food available along the way. Who would want to open a can when you can get it fresh from the market?
And you did some fishing too, right? You actually got some fresh fish and stuff.
You bet. Absolutely. That is one of the treats of going on passages in a blue water boat, is you're at sea in places that, while there is a lot of fishing, global fishing going on, it's a big ocean.
Yeah.
And so you're going to find wild animals, fish out there. And so the treat is, pulling in a mahi-mahi or a swordfish or bluefin tunas, or all, I think I caught probably 8 different kinds of tuna during the trip.
You leave from the coast of North Carolina. How did you choose your route?
Well, part of the equation is, first of all, deciding what you want to do, where you want to travel. And so what route you take is partly dependent on the areas of the world you want to visit. But a big part of the equation, first of all, is you're in a sailboat and you want to be able to sail, not have to have tons of fuel on board and motor all the way. And then part of that equation is there's certain times of the year when there are favorable winds, certain times of year when there are not cyclones and hurricanes, and so you want to match those parts of the equation to a nice safe travel, few storms, good winds, good following seas, and go to the places you want to go. But one of the things that we thought when we were, I bought books and stuff years before this trip, and one of the things we thought was we would go certain places at certain times of the year, and even when we left, we found that there were places we wanted to go that we learned along the way from other sailors, from other people, after we learned about certain places as we were going along, that changed our route. So our route varied quite a bit, but not dramatically, because we still had to go where a sailboat could go and not be too cold and not be too hot, all those kinds of factors. And but there were some big variances.
If someone was watching this video because they're in the thought process of maybe one day I want to do this,
Mm-hmm.
what is one key piece of advice that you would give them?
Well, first of all, if they're not already an existing boater, they need to get out on a boat and find out if traveling on a boat is for them. A lot of people make the mistake of buying a big boat, making the plan, but they never actually traveled on a boat. They never actually did an overnight passage. They didn't even know they were prone to being seasick. And so you need to do that. And the way I recommend they do that is charter a boat in hopefully a very nice location like the Bahamas or the Caribbean or somewhere like that. Like I did a school before our first travels that trained you to charter boats. And they gave you all the basics on how to do overnight passages and navigate and how to use radios and things like that, so that you can take a week course to learn the basics. It gives you a certificate basically that says I can charter a boat. I know enough to be able to do that. And so I'd recommend at least at a minimum you do that. If possible, own a boat for a while and do some traveling in exotic locations before you make a big passage to go around the world, so that you can learn what it's like to do long passages, overnight passages at sea, and whether you have the competency and abilities to do that.
Is there anything else that you want to add to this part of the story?
You might want to learn some basic phrases in the languages, places you're going to go, especially the polite phrases. Thank you, please, hello, do you have? So,
how much does it cost?
How much is this? So that's very good. I mean, we even learned some phrases in Fiji.
Mm-hmm.
Then you need to learn polite things to do, like in Fiji. You walk in anywhere in a store and you say bula bula. That's the polite thing that says hello, I'm here. So you need to learn not just the words, but you need to learn a little bit about the culture before you actually put your foot on land.
So immerse yourself in it.
And it helps dramatically in your relations with other people in other countries if you take the time to learn a little bit about their culture and what you can and should do. And like, for example, another thing in Fiji is you're actually required, if you're a boater, when you come to an island, to go ashore and find the chief of the village and request permission to park your boat there. And you also they have a gift or relationship. You have to bring a gift to the chief to ask permission. It's not just ask permission. So you need to learn that before you go there, so that you have the right type of gift to give and what to ask and what is allowed.
Absolutely.
So books help with that, but I imagine other people, the boating community, help immensely.
Absolutely.
Passing on their experiences.
Talking to a lot of other boaters, read their blogs, know what to expect.
And there are books available on a lot of these things that you can buy before you start the trip, or as you're going along and you're going to another region where you're going to need to learn. You can look up resources either online or in books.
And next we'll actually get underway and start talking about some of the stories and where you guys have been, and so that'll be coming up next. Thank you. I hope everyone found their stories about their preparations as interesting as I did. What I found even more interesting is what's coming up in part 2 of this story, where they talk about the places that they went and the things that they did along their way. So we'll see you in the next video. Until then, have fun out there on the water. A quick reminder for those of you that haven't hit the subscribe button yet, go ahead and hit it. It's located at the bottom right hand corner of the screen. Once you hit that, ring the bell, select all, so you get all the notifications and you don't miss any of our great content we have coming up.